The MP for Calais, Pierre-Henri Dumont, rubbished Home Secretary Priti Patel's latest £54 million enforcement payment to France as pointless because migrants will just find somewhere else to cross. Steve Valdez-Symonds, Amnesty UK's Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director, says if the UK wants to stop illegal migration, it must allow people to come to the UK without needing to rely on smugglers and dangerous journeys. But Migration Watch's chairman, Alp Mehmet, says he backs the government's crackdown on illegal migration, but that despite tough talk, Priti Patel hasn't actually sent a single person back to their country of origin, and they both join me now. And Alp, that is the issue, isn't it? There's a lot of tough rhetoric from the government, but as it stands, anyone that crosses the English Channel remains in the UK.
Yes, it ever was thus, I suppose, except the Channel crossings are a relatively recent phenomenon. In 2018, there were 299 the whole year, and most of them came in October onwards. 2019, it was just under 2,000. In 2020, it climbed up to 8,500. We're already at that point before the end of July this year. So clearly, people think this is the way to do it. It's easy to get into the UK doing it this way. And secondly, the numbers are going to go up hugely by the end of the year and will continue to go up unless we do something about it.
So, Steve, from Amnesty UK's point of view, what needs to be done about it? Because surely you concede that these arrivals on small boats, which is fueling the people smuggling gangs and actually putting lots of lives at risk as well, just cannot go on.
Well, sadly, it can go on. The question is whether it will go on. Completely agree that these are dangerous journeys. Very worried about the safety of the people who make them, and completely agree that many of them are subject to extreme extortion and abuse by smuggling gangs. But let's remember, firstly, yes, the number of people over the last few years, as Alp Mehmet points out, who've made these crossings has significantly increased. The number of people who've claimed asylum in this country, on the other hand, has not increased. Indeed, it fell last year, which shows you that what we are seeing, or certainly what we've seen to date, has been largely displacement of people from one type of route onto another. And it shows why simply cracking down on particular journeys, particular routes, doesn't end smuggling. It just makes people more vulnerable to smugglers who find new routes and new ways of exploiting people.
Those numbers have gone down because of the coronavirus crisis, right?
Well, they've certainly affected the capacity to cross by what had been the crossings before, largely through things like the Channel Tunnel, by lorries and other routes. And I'm sure that has had an impact. But one of that impacts has been to spill onto other new routes. And I'm afraid they have become more and more developed. And so the question is really, what is being done to address the needs of the people who turn to smugglers and these dangerous routes? And at the moment, nothing is being done to address that. And something desperately does need to be done, including by providing safe routes for people to claim asylum in this country. We can't keep on imagining that France can take 4 times the level of responsibility as this country and us not sharing responsibility virtually at all.
Alp, what do you make of that? Is that the solution, that we've got to take more people?
Well, firstly, the UK resettlement scheme started up in February, and we are already looking not just in the areas that we were before, but we're looking at refugees, we're looking at children, and we're looking to make proper arrangements. To suggest that we should now take in anyone who jumps into a dinghy having paid a lot of money simply because they ask for asylum, I think is absurd, frankly. It assumes that they're all refugees in the strict sense of the word, and very clearly they're not. The vast majority of them, we know, are able, strong young men who've got some money. Sometimes their communities have put the money together to get them, but they are not refugees in the way that people imagine refugees.
So they're actually economic migrants, Steve. What's your response to that?
Well, I just don't accept it. None of the data that you can see over the last few years bears that out. Even the Home Office formal figures showing you what happens to people's claims once they're admitted to the system shows you that the majority of people are not just making good asylum claims, they will found to be refugees when their claims are finally determined. And that success rate has been going up. And more than that, the nationalities of people crossing the Channel are nationalities that have disproportionately high success rates in our asylum system, which again emphasises that certainly to date, the people who are making these crossings have good claims to make and are entitled to asylum. And by the way,
but why are they mainly young men, Steve? Steve, why can't you? How do you explain that they're mainly young men in these boats?
I honestly do not understand why people keep making on about this. Young men escape persecution. For crying out loud, there are young men fleeing the Taliban in Afghanistan as we speak, so situation getting much, much worse. There are many young men who've had to flee the repressive regime in Eritrea. There are many young men fleeing the conflict in Darfur, which again is getting much worse. So men do have to flee persecution. It's got nothing to do with them being male or young. The question is, what are they fleeing from? And most of them are fleeing from torture, conflict,
isn't
persecution.
Isn't the issue, Alp Mehmet, though? Yes, of course, but let me just put it to you this way. Isn't the issue, Alp, the fact that because they come in via these illegal means, we don't know where they've come from, we don't know if they are fleeing those regimes or if they've previously been members of terrorist groups themselves, because they don't have any papers to prove it or back it up?
Absolutely. We don't very often know. But let's be clear. A lot of those who are coming here in boats have already been in safe countries. They've gone through a series of safe countries. France is an advanced safe country, and they have chosen to leave those countries to come here. Also, if you look at France's record on those that they grant asylum to, it's something like 20% of applicants receive asylum on first application. 48% of ours, more than double the number, are given asylum at first application. The EU's average is 37%. Now, we have a lot of people who arrive here, and we know from what we hear from the Home Office, from the Border Force, that many of them have already applied and been turned down, and they've even tried more than once to get into this country.
OK, well, let's let Steve Valdez-Symonds respond to that. Steve, isn't that a fair point, that the vast majority of these illegals crossing the Channel were already in France, right?
Yes, they were, and many of them living in squalid conditions, receiving violence from the French police and with no access to the French asylum system. Also, a significant number of them, Amnesty knows, we visited northern France on many occasions. Many of them also have family and connections in this country. And people are entitled to seek asylum in the country that they wish to, particularly when they have connections here. So there are two perfectly good reasons why a minority of people make these journeys. I don't have any issue with the idea that France provides safety to a very large number of people, in fact, an enormously more large number of people than does this country, about 4 times the number. So, of course, if we continue that disproportionality, some people will continue not to be able to find safety in France, which is the case with so many of these people.
Alp?
Well, I hope that Steve's not suggesting that these people are fleeing persecution or bad conditions in France. That is not the idea of asylum.
Is that what you're suggesting, Steve?
Well, I'm certainly not saying they're fleeing persecution in France, but yes, they are fleeing violence and exclusion in France. Go and look in northern France. You'll see the lives that people have been living, sometimes for many, many months on end. So, yes, they've very good reason to want to find somewhere safe, because France has not been safe for them.
Alp, is that a fair point?
No, I don't think it is, actually. I'm sorry, Steve. But if that is a problem in France, then that is France's problem. We are paying the French a great deal of money now, frankly, to do a job that they were supposed to be doing, or they should be doing anyway. I think it's totally ridiculous, really, that we are paying them to say, please stop these people from coming over. Why don't we say to them, look, they've arrived in your country, they're looking for safe refuge. If that is indeed what they qualify for, then give it to them. We are already going out looking for people and making proper arrangements. If we want to stop boatloads of people risking their lives coming over here, then this is not the sort of message that we want to send out. What Steve is suggesting and what we should be doing is actually returning people so that the process, the route doesn't itself become as attractive as it clearly has.
All right, thank you for a spirited clash. That is Migration Watch's chairman, Alp Mehmet, and Steve Valdez-Symonds, Amnesty UK's refugee and migrant rights programme director. An absolute pleasure to have you both here tonight.